Hello, I'm Connor Hilton. I'm the editor-in-chief of User Focus World, and I'm here with Alan Nogi from Strategies Unlimited. He's a laser analyst. Alan has just finished a market report on the laser market, and which we all know is one of the hottest laser technologies. It's impacting industrial materials processing applications and some other application areas versus biomedical devices and remote sensing in oil and gas extraction. So I've asked Alan to give us a brief summary of his research, and then we can take some questions from the audience. If you have questions, you can either, and you're on Google+, you can type them into the Q&A, which is on the left side of the screen, or you can use the Twitter handle to ask the questions, and that's next to my name. So, Alan, over to you to tell us a little bit about the study and what you found.
Yeah, thank you there, Connor. As Connor says, I've just completed a fiber laser report. The fiber laser industry is growing rapidly, and just recently the revenue in fiber lasers crossed $1 billion. So we thought it was time to update the fiber laser report. I have a little presentation I'm going to switch over to. Bear with me for a second. And over here. I wanted to give a little bit of background on fiber lasers, and then I'm going to give some numbers and some outcome from my report. People have been talking about fiber lasers in the last 5 to 10 years, certainly, but most people don't realize that fiber lasers have been around for a long time. In fact, they're one of the oldest type of lasers. They were invented in 1963, 51 years ago. It took a while to commercialize them and get them at higher powers, but by 1990, 4-watt fiber lasers were in existence. And in the late 1990s, IPG, JDSU, Spectrophysics, and Polaroid were all working on fiber lasers, and they had fiber lasers in about the 10-watt range in the late 90s. By the year 2000, IPG hit the 100-watt range for fiber lasers. Now, fiber lasers probably wouldn't be as successful today if it wasn't for the telecom and the internet bubble bursting back in the early 2000s. At the time, IPG was a major telecom manufacturer making optical amplifiers and such. And when the telecom bubble burst, they rightfully put all their resources, some of the resources, into fiber lasers and pushed that to make up some of the revenue that they lost in the telecom industry. And they did quite a good job. In fact, by 2002, IPG had a 10 kilowatt fiber laser. You might even note that many other companies, most other companies, don't even have a 10 kilowatt fiber laser today. So that shows you how advanced in the fiber laser field IPG was compared to other companies. Just last year, IPG delivered a 100 kilowatt fiber laser, which is pictured here, to an Asian customer. Now, looking over some of the information from the report, this first slide is total revenue and fiber laser revenue in the industrial area. Now, fiber lasers have been so successful because they're very power efficient. They generally have no free space optics. They're compact, they're scalable, they're durable, they're readily, easily maintained, and they're solid state. Their limitations have been that they rely on fiber, and the fiber hasn't always been available at various wavelengths that are needed for some lasers, but that's been increasing and being worked out in the last few years. On this chart, you see the percentage of fiber lasers for industrial, which is marking kilowatt materials processing and micro materials processing. The amount of fiber lasers as in terms of revenue is 28% back in 2012, I should say. 34% we forecast this year, all the way up to 45% in 2017. Now, fiber lasers are good for a lot of kinds of industrial work. Certainly thin metal cutting, aluminum and copper are really good for fiber lasers. CO2 lasers work still better for really thick metals and wood and plastic. But fiber lasers are getting better in some of these areas as well. In the non-industrial areas, fiber lasers are starting to penetrate, but to a lesser extent. They're in the sensor area, military, medical, R&D, and printing. And this slide shows the sensor and the medical area, which are two of the highest penetration areas for fiber laser. Together, in 2012, they accounted for about 5%, 5.5% of all revenue in those areas. This year, we anticipate about 6%, and we think that will go up to 7.4% in 2017. I didn't include 2018. I do have the fiber laser revenue for that year, but I haven't fully calculated the full laser revenue, so I couldn't present that in the slide. This slide is the breakdown of revenue for fiber lasers for 2014. Now, as you can see, kilowatt material processing still represents over 50% of the total revenue bundle for fiber lasers, 50.7%. And of that amount, 70%, over 70% is just metal cutting. The remaining amount is welding and a few other applications. So overall, fiber lasers are very strong in metal cutting. That's their expertise. Moving down the pies, in the orange section, you'll see marking. Now, marking is predominantly done with fiber lasers today. And most of those lasers are manufactured in Asia. They're lower power pulsed lasers. A lot of them, in fact, come from China, which has really pushed down the price of marking lasers. The next segment is micromaterials processing. That's materials processing of using lasers that are under a kilowatt. And this is an interesting category because it has many segments in it. Fine metal processing makes up the largest segment with about 63% of the total. Now, the most interesting one to watch is additive manufacturing. Makes up about 9% of the micromaterials segment. Now, additive manufacturing can be done using plastic parts or metal parts. It can be done with a laser or without a laser. But in the metal area, lasers are typically used, and lasers usually melt metal powder, or some of the lasers are used to melt a metal wire, which is used for additive manufacturing. Additive manufacturing overall is one of the fastest segments that are growing for fiber lasers. I forecast a 26% compounded annual growth rate over the next 5 years for additive manufacturing, 3D printing, if you will. Other segments of fiber lasers are sensors, which are a little bit under 5%, military, a little bit more than 3% of the total, and there's companies such as Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman are all making directed energy fiber laser weapons. Moving down is medical, a little under 3%. R&D makes up about 2.5% of the fiber laser pie. And finally, rounding that out is printing, which is about 1% of the fiber laser total. On this slide is the total revenue for both industrial and non-industrial applications for fiber lasers and the forecast out to 2018. Now, in the industrial area, as we talked about, the kilowatt material processing is the biggest segment of industrial. It grew 22% last year, or this year I should say, in 2014 forecasted. For the non-industrial fiber laser area, medical is growing the fastest. We forecast a 23% growth this year, 2014. For sensors, second biggest in that segment, a 14% growth this year. Finally, I wanted to introduce this fiber laser report, which I've completed. It goes much more in detail in all these segments I talked about, and then breaks down each of these segments further in further detail. Like, for example, metal cutting in the high power is broken down into flat sheet cutting, tube cutting, and 3D cutting. The welding area is broken down into automotive, tube cutting, and other type of processing. Micromaterials is broken down into these segments. And it's also covered is the marking area, the printing area, military, sensors, and R&D. The forecasts for the report go from 2013 to 2018. Now, if you should have some questions, as Conrad says, please submit those. I'm going to switch my camera back to my picture, and then we can get some questions here. Oops.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. If you have questions, as I said, you can use the Google Plus Q&A. It's on the screen, or you can use the Twitter handle there, the strategies_U. So I gathered from your presentation, Alan, that CO2 lasers are not dead, right?
Yeah, that's true. CO2 lasers have become a lot more competitive with the introduction of fiber lasers because they had to. But CO2 lasers make up the majority of industrial lasers. Actually, they've gotten much more power efficient. The life has been much longer, and they emit light at 10 microns as opposed to 1 micron. So they fit a different material class than fiber lasers, and they're generally still better at the very thick metal. CO2 lasers are also more eye safe, which is a benefit. They're good for leather as well. So CO2 lasers are not going anywhere soon. They have a lifetime of about 10 years, so they'll be with us forever. They're not disappearing.
Good news, I'm sure. So from your research, which areas are you seeing the most growth, and why? What's driving that?
Which geographic areas? Is that what you're asking?
Geographic areas, yes.
Okay. Yeah, most of the fiber lasers, the majority of fiber lasers go to Asia. And we can look where they're manufactured, and we can look where they're used. But Asia is a huge consumption area for fiber lasers, for American companies. The Asian companies are not quite up to making many of the types of fiber lasers that are used, especially in the industrial space. So many companies in Europe and in the US that make big industrial fiber lasers sell most of them to Asia. Second place is probably Europe in terms of consumption. A good part of that is for automotive manufacturing. And the US, North America, is probably third down the line.
Okay. And I see, you mentioned additive manufacturing, which of course is a very hot area right now. Would you say fiber lasers are taking over additive manufacturing? Is that the dominant technology, fiber laser technology that's being used?
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's a lot of additive manufacturing, as I mentioned. Most of it is not laser driven. It's plastics and other types. Lasers are used in stereolithography, which solidifies a resin. Those are not fiber lasers, but those are lasers that are used. But generally where the fiber lasers are being used is in metal additive manufacturing. There's a few other means being developed, but lasers predominantly are the main type of lasers used for metal additive manufacturing. I'd say additive manufacturing is still in its infancy, but there's so much potential, and so much of conventional manufacturing could convert to additive manufacturing in the next 5 to 10 years. It's potentially a huge market for fiber lasers.
There's a question. Do you have any numbers on the percentage mix of CO2 versus fiber in the additive manufacturing market? What will it look like in 5 years?
Yeah, in additive manufacturing, CO2 lasers are used. I don't have it in front of me. You can always email me for more precise results. But as I remember it, I would say a good 85%, I would say, is fiber lasers. CO2 lasers still make up quite a small segment of additive manufacturing.
Okay. So another question I'm sure that a number of companies are thinking about um, is, is there any room in the market for small fiber laser manufacturers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the great thing about fiber lasers is that um, they can have multiple wavelengths. They can do ultra short picosecond, femtosecond lasers. It offers a lot of flexibility. So what you see is a lot of little homegrown companies in the fiber laser market. Ultra fast lasers, one company, mid IR lasers, etc. So there's a lot of market for different niche areas. Now some of these companies are having trouble finding an application for their lasers, but it does exist, and there's many fiber laser companies that are, 5 employees, 10 employees. It's really an interesting industry that's arising.
Great. All right. Well, I guess that's all for me and the audience. Um, as you said earlier, the Fiber Laser Report is available at the Strategies Unlimited website. There's a lot more data and market analysis on the global market for all lasers will be presented in February at the Lasers and Photonics Marketplace Seminar, which is on February 9th during Photonics West. The full agenda for that seminar is you can find that on the Laser Focus World website. Alan's contact information is on the screen now. And thank you very much for attending this hangout. I look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thanks a lot.